Hi, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to this third event from Bright Blue's event series, Looking Ahead to COP, presented in partnership with the John Ellerman Foundation. My name is Andrew Limming, and I'm an energy and environment researcher with Bright Blue. This event is entitled Cleaner Waters, Protecting the UK's Rivers and Oceans. Clean water, of course, is an essential biological element for sustaining human and animal life. It is also fundamental to how we operate our agricultural systems, maintain our households, and run our key industries. But the impact of society on the inland and coastal waterways that sustain these activities has become more severe over time, with dire consequences for fragile ecosystems and habitats. In the UK specifically, pollution and overexploitation of our chalk streams and coastal waterways have contributed to a dramatic decline in freshwater and marine biodiversity, presenting a key challenge for the UK's climate change and conservation goals. So, are further policies needed to safeguard and restore biodiversity in UK inland and coastal waterways? What impact are sewage and other pollutants having on our waterways, and how can this be addressed? How critical are marine carbon sinks in the fight against climate change? Does the Fisheries Act adequately protect the UK's marine environment? And should the UK ban bottom trawling throughout all of its marine protected areas? Here to discuss these questions with us today are our distinguished panel of guests, including Sir Oliver Heald, Conservative MP for North East Hertfordshire and Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Chalk Streams, Deborah Leach, Chief Executive Officer at Thames 21, Richard Parry, Chief Executive of the Canal and River Trust, and Hugo Tagholm, Chief Executive of the Surfers Against Sewage charity. Before we begin, I just want to remind the audience that if you'd like to submit questions for the Q&A session, you can do so using the Slido event link located below the video, or on Twitter by tweeting at the hashtag #BrightBlue. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to share their thoughts and ideas on our main topic. And if you're ready, Sir Oliver, I will hand the floor to you.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I mean, this is a key moment, a unique opportunity for us to address the issues of improving the health both of our rivers and our seas, and also in the same measures that need to be taken to improve our chances of tackling climate change. And I want to make sort of 3 key points, really. The first is that our rivers are in an appalling state. Only 14% are within good river quality by virtue of the framework directive. I mean, if you look at our seas, we've got 15 indicators of good environmental health. We're failing on 11 of them. So there's no question, my first point is that we do need to take action. My second point is that with COP26 coming up and with the government wanting to present its environmental credentials, we are seeing the government put in place a raft of legislation that provides a good platform to see some improvements. And so just to give an example, Charles Walker and I, who set up the all-party group on chalk streams, and they're a very precious resource. But when we set it up, we also put an amendment down to the Environment Bill that if there were low flows in a river, that should count as environmental damage, which needs restoration. And the government accepted that, which I think is a very important point. And then again, my colleague Philip Dunn brought forward a bill about the question of sewage emissions through storm overflows into rivers. And this is a huge problem. I mean, 400,000 incidents a year, tons and tons of sewage going into our rivers. I think it's something like 13 million hours of sewage going into rivers, including precious chalk streams. But the government did accept the spirit of what he was suggesting. They've set up a task force to tackle storm overflows, and they have agreed to put into the Environment Bill that there will be a plan to tackle this. So again, measures which I welcome. I think if you look at the seas, the Fisheries Act can be a huge benefit if used properly. It's the first time that fisheries are brought in to this area of environmental protection. And we're already seeing with the 4 pilots in in the protection zones of dealing with bottom trawling, that this can be used in an effective way. And it could go much further, as I'll say in a moment in my third point. And then I think the government's showing leadership in groups like the Global Ocean Alliance, where we're trying to move up the number of protected areas so that rather than being about 7% of the ocean, it's actually 30% by 2030. So, there's some good things happening and more can be done. My third point are what actions I would call for. And the first is I would ban bottom trawling completely. If you think about the benefits that you get from seagrasses, kelp, just having sands and muds at low tide, they all sequester carbon. And if you think about salt marshes, which is a slightly separate issue, but again, that's the same point. These need restoring. And so bottom trawling, where it just goes through and damages it all, and potentially is emitting carbon in the process. I think that's something that we need to stop. Secondly, my colleague Richard Benyon, who's now in the House of Lords, who was a founder of the Conservative Environment Network parliamentary panel with me, he's recently done this review, and what he's suggesting is that we should have higher protection marine areas, and these would be areas where there's no fish caught at all, and where the what he calls giving a breather, give the fish a breather and the environment, so that you've got some areas where new fish stocks can flood through into neighboring areas and where you've really got some top protection. And then the third thing is I do think blue carbon, the sort of carbon which is emitted from bottom trawling and other activity, but also the measures that carbon can be sequestered by the sea, that's something which we ought to have in our inventory. And so it needs auditing and mapping so that there is a national understanding that blue carbon is as important as terrestrial. And you look at the amount sequestered by seagrasses, salt marshes, and so on, it's about 10.5 million tons a year, and it's less than terrestrial, but it's still very important. So those are my asks, and that's just a few comments to open up the debate.
Excellent. Thank you, Sir Oliver. I would just have a quick follow-up question about the Environment Bill. Some of the discussions about some of the reports on biodiversity protection, land protection, etc. in the UK have focused on the question of management and oversight. Do you think the Office of Environmental Protection is sufficiently empowered to take on the new ambitions the UK has in terms of marine and land protection?
Well, it's vital that it should be, and we haven't finished the course yet on the Environment Bill. As you'll know, there are further discussions and amendments to be had. In fact, I think it's not next week, but the week after, Wednesday, we're having day 2 of the debates in report. So it may be that it's further assurances from ministers that are required, or it may be that amendments will succeed. But yes, I agree, it needs to be an effective body, because it's replacing European regulation, which of course was effective.
Thank you for that. Deborah, if you'd like to take the floor, you have 5 minutes.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Morning, everybody. So the background is that Thames 21 is an environmental charity for rivers, focusing on the Thames and its tributaries. And in my 5 minutes, I'll focus on the question impact of sewage on our waterways and how it can be addressed. And I want to underline that sewage overflows have a devastating impact on rivers across the country. And I've been chief executive of Thames 21 since 2005. And as a Boots in the River charity, I have first-hand experience of the impact of sewage on the River Thames and its tributaries. I see it, our staff team see it, and thousands of our volunteers and our citizen scientists see it. And it is an increasing problem. We see fish crowding at the surface of the Thames, gasping for air. They're in water where the bacteria from the sewage has knocked out the oxygen. And sometimes we see groups of dead fish floating along the River Lee in their thousands, literally. And we see heaps and mounds of wet wipes and sanitary products left on the Thames foreshore from the sewage overflows going into the River Thames. And we can tell you about the terrible stinks at so many locations along the network of rivers and streams. And then there's the carpets of sewage fungus that are building up. And this disaster for our rivers is now well documented. The root causes of how our rivers came to be polluted are the result of a number of historical factors: how the sewage system first developed, how it's been invested in or not over the years, and the growing changes in population and climate that we see today. And without doubt, the infrastructure of water companies is vastly inadequate and it needs investment. At the same time, the public and development hasn't helped by paving over gardens and effectively channeling rainwater into the combined sewage system. There are planning regulations that should be used by local authorities to help tackle this. But what we really need to focus on now is effective solutions. In a couple of years, the Thames Tideway Tunnel will be completed, and it'll be effective at tackling sewage discharged into the tidal Thames. But engineering solutions like this have a shorter lifespan as population expands and as climate change causes heavier and more frequent downpours that cause the system to overload. So the answer is a greater commitment made now to nature-based solutions, from sustainable urban drainage systems to constructed wetlands to rain planters. They have now an evidenced track record of success at reducing the rainwater that's overloading the combined sewage system and making the sewage discharge into rivers. Nature-based solutions such as constructed wetlands not only capture, filter and clean stormwater, but they provide a range of other benefits. In built-up areas in particular, they could be hugely important havens for wildlife, from fish to birds, and absolutely fantastic at connecting people with nature. Really important community resources as well. So we must plan to invest in natural infrastructure as well as the development of our sewage infrastructure. But we can't even start to plan a response like this until we know exactly what we're dealing with, until we know and measure the scale of the problem we have. It's hugely important that we have a really clear, cohesive strategy for this. For example, what exactly is meant by exceptional rainfall when it comes to allowing sewage discharges into rivers? There is no clear definition. At present, each combined sewage overflow has its own license that sets when it is unfortunately permissible to discharge. We need better, more strategic ways of measuring and monitoring in order to move forward toward improvement. And it will enable Ofwat to determine more effectively the level of investment that's needed to address the discharges of sewage into rivers. And there are other issues I just want to touch on quickly before I pass on to others. There's also the timescale for reparations for sewage pollution incidents. It's far too long. Whether there are prosecutions or enforcement undertakings, it can take 3 or 4 years between an incident and before those reparations are in place. So there needs to be a better, stronger and faster connection between pollution incidents and the consequences so that the direct improvements come through faster. So my final point is that the effective use of widespread solutions, such as increased use of nature-based solutions, will require a collaborative approach if it's going to be successful. These things will require a collaboration between water companies, the Environment Agency, flood schemes, local authorities, developers, and the funding mechanisms must be integrated towards achieving these common solutions. And at the moment, this just isn't happening. So just to sum up, the situation in our rivers is frankly horrifying. People love rivers, but too often they are swimming in filth. The solutions are there. All it requires is resolution, commitments, collaborative working, and investment, and this situation can be turned around. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah. It was a very good presentation. I would just like to remind the audience that you can submit questions to our speakers through the Slido link below the video or on Twitter, if you so choose. Richard, would you like to take the floor? You have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. The Canal River Trust was launched in 2012 as a new charity taking responsibility for 2,000 miles of inland waterway navigation across England and Wales. Around a fifth of that is river navigation, where we own and operate the locks and other structures that have no ownership of the river itself. The remainder, the bulk, being the man-made canals, where we own the channel, the towpath, as well as the structures. making us a linear landowner, providing green and blue corridors through our towns and cities, connecting to the countryside and into the river network, ideal routes for wildlife and also for people. There are nearly 9 million people living in close proximity to one of the Trust's waterways, providing access to nature on the doorstep with all the health and well-being benefits that provides, often for some of the most deprived urban communities for whom access to blue and green space is at a premium, providing the greatest benefit. And of course, water resources are vital for our network, and that's been under growing pressure as we face the impact of more extreme weather with longer dry periods and heavy storms, which also puts considerable strain on 200 and more year old structures. So we are very exposed to the impact of the climate emergency. Our canals play an important role in our national land drainage, moving water around. We absorb a lot of the clean water surface runoffs and discharges that Debbie spoke of into our canals, and this can relieve pressure on the sewage system and help indirectly to mitigate some of the excessive overflows she spoke of. Clearly, improving water quality is vital if we are to support nature recovery, especially in those urban areas. We should acknowledge there has been significant improvement over the past 50 years or so, when urban waterways would often be highly contaminated. One hears apocryphal stories of dredged silt material spontaneously igniting when brought to the surface. It was so full of flammable chemicals. And we do now see wildlife returning as an indicator of that improved water quality. Otters, for example, now seen across Birmingham and the Black Country's waterways. But of course, as others will discuss too, there are still many urgent challenges in improving water quality and dealing with the ongoing pollution that all of our water bodies suffer, from diffuse agricultural and urban sources, as well as the high-profile excessive sewer outflows and the discovery of ubiquitous persistent chemicals. And further effort is required across all sectors, including, but not exclusively, the water companies to address this challenge. At the Canal and River Trust, our most immediate actions are to tackle the vast amount of plastic and other litter and debris that accumulates in and around our waterways, that pollutes the water, harms wildlife, and makes them unattractive for people. A lot of the rubbish that builds up isn't dropped by visitors. Some blows in from neighbouring areas, but sadly we suffer badly from illegal fly tipping. There are few sights more depressing than finding a road bridge over the canal and seeing rubbish strewn amongst the vegetation and into the water, where people have clearly dumped it from a car or van without a second thought for the harm that that does. This pollution of waterways is high profile because so many people can see it, and of course anything that affects the canals feeds into the rivers and onward to the sea, because it all connects, flows downhill and reaches tidal water in the end. So it is important we try to tackle this pollution at source. Our primary campaign focused on this is the Plastics Challenge, launched in 2018 and growing in scale each year to fight the estimated 14 million pieces of plastic litter that we suffer each year. Every morning, our litter clearance boat in central Birmingham fills up with rubbish, for example, and altogether we spend an estimated £1 million a year just in clearing that litter, in addition to all the great work that our thousands of volunteers and other partner groups do to help us to keep it clear. A constant ongoing social action effort which we value greatly, but which during the past year and the lockdown effects of the pandemic has meant that litter has accumulated because we haven't had the same resource to clear it up. And this is an issue that is not adequately regulated or controlled, or really driven by the polluter pays principles, with the trust very often bearing the impact. So our campaign encourages our millions of users to take their litter away and to help us clean up these beautiful blue-green spaces on the doorstep by taking one piece of litter, if they can, away with them. There's no need to sign up, just play your own small part when and where you can, and together the collective aggregate effort can deliver the cleaner waterways we all desire, or make a contribution at least to that. This links into our other major initiative to secure green flag status for our waterways as a public statement that they are attractive and well-managed places, with over 400 miles already designated, including some inner city stretches in places like Manchester, Liverpool and Birmingham. Despite this effort, Like the other pollution that still impacts our waterways, plastic litter is sadly not going away. And the general problems of pollution that we face need to be tackled from a number of directions, to agree very much with what Debbie has said. Raising awareness to galvanise action to try to reduce the pollution at source, working collaboratively with all the other parties involved in this. Improving control and regulation, both of sewage and agricultural pollution, funding measures to directly protect rivers and other waterways, putting measures in place to capture and clean up water pollution in the waterway corridors before it transfers and passes on into our seas. At present, funding is too often not available for those who have to deal with these issues. Ownership and responsibility for rivers being dispersed amongst riparian landowners and a number of different agencies. And investment in remedying problems does not follow to those in a position to take action. The Trust, other partners, landowners, local councils could all play a stronger role to tackle diffuse pollution in our waterways if we were funded to do so. Through nature-based solutions, both at the water's edge and in the waterway, to trap and clean up runoff and discharges, increased activity on litter pollution and collection. Beyond that, we can resource ourselves today, on top of all the costs we do incur. The wider environmental benefit that could be delivered would fully justify this. Thank you, Andrew and Oliver.
Thank you very much, Richard. Appreciate that. We've got some great questions coming in through Slido. Just remind the audience that you can submit yours using the link or hashtag #BrightBlue on Twitter. Hugo, I'll hand over to you for 5 minutes, if you like. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and great presentation so far. I'm Hugo Tagholm, I'm the Chief Executive of Surfers Against Sewage, and we're a national marine conservation charity focused on water quality issues, plastic pollution and climate change and how that relates to our blue spaces. We represent an estimated 300,000 regular supporters and empower over 100,000 volunteers annually through beach cleans and other campaign activities. We also act as a secretariat for the Ocean Conservation All-Party Parliamentary Group, which brings together politicians and various stakeholders to discuss and deliver solutions. Now, of course, polluted waters is what kick-started the organisation some 30 years ago and is, as we've heard, an issue that still worryingly endures. Despite the progress we've made, with much to be celebrated with improvements at many coastal bathing waters, there's still huge work to do to protect and restore our blue spaces and to ensure that our rivers and ocean ecosystems can thrive once again. Sadly, the UK still ranks a woeful 25th out of 30 European countries for bathing water quality. Only 66% of official UK bathing waters meet excellent classification, compared to 87% of European coastal bathing waters. Almost 35% of bathing waters need some form of improvement to be elevated to the excellent standard, a standard that Surfers Against Sewage believes they should all meet. Now, data from our Safer Sea service, which is a real-time water quality app, the only water quality app like this in the country, shows that water companies are still discharging sewage at alarming rates near designated bathing waters, polluting the environment and risking public health. Last year, we tracked almost 3,000 combined sewer overflow pollution events affecting these bathing waters. And sadly, the state of our rivers is even worse, as we've heard, with just 14% meeting good ecological status and none meeting good chemical status. 100% of England's rivers, lakes and waterways are polluted with synthetic chemicals related to human activity. And this isn't really a surprise when we consider the scale of agricultural and sewage emissions on our rivers. Last year, water companies pumped sewage into our rivers 400,000 times over 3.1 million hours. And the emissions from agriculture and urban environments also match this scale. And this untreated sewage and runoff carries myriad pollutants. Our CSOs effectively acting as a largely hidden network of horizontal smokestacks, emitting a toxic smog of pharmaceuticals, pathogens, plastics, chemicals, and other pollutants into the blue arteries of our nation. And just yesterday, we heard that these combined sewer overflows were a major source of microplastic pollution in our rivers. This must now surely be a focal point for action and investment in this decade of ecosystem restoration. Meaningful action will bring the triple benefits of creating clean blue spaces for people and communities with the associated economic benefits, restoring biodiversity and creating river carbon capture systems and climate resilience. Added to this, our rivers are nature's own biodiversity corridors, linking habitats and ecosystems nationwide. Regulation and enforcement against continued water pollution by water companies and farming isn't currently working. With inadequate investment and resources to empower regulators, undertake investigations and enforce tough penalties, fines can simply be built into industry operating costs. And so what are we calling for? Well, we have the Environment Bill coming up, and we need world-leading water quality legislation with an Environment Bill that exceeds EU water quality standards. We need an enhanced water quality testing regime, providing a true picture of the UK's water quality, testing for emerging viruses and antimicrobial bacteria, and also plastic pollution and other chemicals. And we need, as we've heard from the other speakers today, nature-based solutions to sewage and agricultural pollution with increased investment and associated targets for the restoration of natural habitats to reduce the pressure on our water systems and help prevent sewer overflows whilst increasing biodiversity and tackling climate change through river carbon sinks, blue river carbon or river carbon and capture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hugo. So now we'll proceed to some questions from the audience. So Oliver, I'd like to ask you to begin with, and then get the sort of thoughts from the other speakers on the recent Dasgupta review and what this means for water policy in the UK. I think you're on mute, Sir Oliver.
Yes, I mean, it's a very important study, and as you know, we're waiting to get the government response to it. I mean, I think there is this, opportunity at the moment because of COP26 and other conferences coming up and the government's, clear intention to show some leadership globally in this area. So I think, now is a good time for such a review, and also for a positive government response. So and I think that's, where I would be on that.
Hugo, do you have any thoughts on the Dasgupta review?
Yeah, look, I agree with Sir Oliver. I think we have a critical, opportunity this year at the start of the ocean decade and the decade of ecosystem restoration to drive real action. And I see alignment between politics, business, and the public growing every day on this. And we must seize that opportunity. We've heard interesting words from Alok Sharma this morning on COP26 and the need to eradicate the use of coal. And quite frankly, all of these opportunities must be seized because business as usual is killing planet ocean, and that all of the indicators point towards that. And we must restore our balance with nature, and this is the time to do that. So,
Andrew, if I might just add, I think the very positive thing I would just add to what Oliver and Hugo said is the fact this was commissioned by the Treasury, and obviously focuses on the economics of the importance of nature. I think gives it added power. I think that's the very positive thing about it, because clearly to secure the resources we will need, the economic argument has to be made. I think we would regard it as something that absolutely should be made, but to see the Treasury commissioning this to embed this thinking at the heart, hopefully, of Treasury policy going forward, as Oliver says, we haven't yet heard the government's response, but I think it's very positive to think about this actually being led from the economic point of view, not just the environmental perspective.
Yes, I agree on the question of sort of the economics of addressing sewage, for instance. If I may put this question to Debbie, this is from Jim Clark, one of our viewers. We need to reduce the amount of rainwater that goes into sewage systems, either through sustainable drainage systems or separating the combined sewage systems. But who should pay for this?
Well, I do think that there needs to be a collaboration in this. and it does require investment. And it will take us time to deliver it. But it's so important that this is done now, and it will have such an impact and effect on our rivers and our waterways and our environment, that it's got to be a priority. We need to see this as a priority, and it's about bringing together the different budgets. It's bringing together budgets from business. It's bringing together the budgets of water companies. It's bringing together the Environment Agency. It's bringing together flood budgets. There's a whole range of budgets out there that could be brought together. If you were working together properly on these, we could really get real change. People are tackling things in silos to an extent still. We know that's wrong. We know it's not the way to get effective change, but it's still happening. We need that collaboration between water companies, Environment Agency, flood schemes, local authorities, developers, and develop those funding mechanisms so that we can achieve those solutions that we all want to see. It's a question of drawing these budgets together, taking a strategic view of what we need to achieve. And you can achieve more than one thing with the same projects and initiatives. For example, flood relief schemes can also be a fantastic way of reducing water from going into the sewage system. There's so much overlap, so much integration. That's what we need to look at. We need to think more clearly and more smartly and more strategically about the issue and bring these budgets together, rather than it's not necessary to put the whole onus on one single budget. I think that there is money out there. There's the money to do it. We're now getting the will to do it and the commitment to do it. So we just need to work more strategically towards bringing these things together. And now is the time to do it. We're all lining up on this, so now is the time to see real action.
Can I just add, Andrew, that I agree with Debbie, that this budget can come across various departments and industries. You know, we can even look at in public health and the cost of mental health issues as they grow, physical health issues, and these blue spaces are vital for communities and people, and to deliver a healthy, happy future for the whole nation. And there is a huge value to restoring these blue spaces to that public health agenda, which we need to look at. And I think we also need to look at the model of funding from the water industry itself and how they invest in protecting nature. Because of course, this impact is outsourced to nature at the moment, it's externalized. But we are looking at an industry that does create billions of pounds in profit for its shareholders every year. Some of that is right, but maybe some of it isn't right. Given an industry that's gone into debt to the tune of 50 billion over the past 30 years, and also given out the same amount of money to its shareholders. So we need to look at the benefits to the environment before the benefits to shareholders at this stage.
I think another point is that the role of Ofwat is very important in this. And at the moment, I think there are water companies that want to do more to save our chalk streams and make environmental improvements, but they do have this problem with Ofwat not necessarily agreeing that they can fund that. And so I think measures like the change to the Environment Bill that says a low level of flow in a river is environmental damage. I mean, that will affect the way in which Ofwat look at these things. So I think that's important. And one of the points about looking at this economically that's giving valuable insights is that if you look at the sequestration of carbon in muds, sands, salt marshes, and in the marine environment, that's actually a more valuable resource for the country in financial terms than the offshore oil and gas industries. And that's the sort of insight that Das Gupta has given. So, I'm hopeful that the government response will be pretty positive to that.
Andrew, can I just add one thing? I mean, as I mentioned in my remarks, we do have the capacity to take some of this surface runoff into our canals, and we've actually participated in things like the yellow fish scheme, where labelling the drain with the yellow fish, that means it will go into the canal or possibly the river, and that is therefore a way in which you can take the pressure off the sewage system. And I think the questioner absolutely hits a key issue. If we can save all that huge investment in expanding the sewer system by actually taking that which can go safely into our canals and directly into our rivers, then that clearly is going to have a very positive and economic benefit if we can use schemes like the Yellowfish in a bigger scale with more knowledge and information. Often it's the education that can provide as much impact as the investment.
Yes, we've just if I could quickly add to that, I fully agree. And we have identified, even in London alone, we've identified more than 400 locations where you can put constructed wetland areas that not only prevent and clean and prevent sewage from going into rivers, but also are amazing places for people and for wildlife. So there is capacity to do that, even in a place like London. So this can be done. There are the places to do this and use nature-based solutions to protect our rivers and our seas.
Andrew, can I just sort of jump in there, because I think there's an interesting the coastal aspect of this, of nature-based solutions and restoring some of the habitats that Oliver mentioned earlier, particularly salt marshes. I know there is some excellent case studies around the UK where sea defences have been taken down to allow salt marshes to recover and expand again, which actually protect coastal communities in a far better way, with big economic benefits that far outweigh anything by not doing it. So I think, you know, there's some real cases for the benefits, not just for restoring the biodiversity and carbon capture benefits of these habitats, but also people and communities that we must protect as we move forward through this decade.
Excellent. So we have a question from Kay Nightingale in the audience. She agrees that collaboration is important to bring about change, but she's wondering, what role can the public play in collaboration to bring about the changes that are needed? Deborah, would you like to take this one on first?
Well, yes. Well, first of all, please stop concreting over your front gardens, because what we're all doing is we're channeling all the rainwater straight into the combined sewage system, where we could be having these fantastic front gardens, which are amazing for nature, for biodiversity, cheer up your streets. And everybody loves seeing front gardens with flowers and trees and hedges in them, and improve the environment for everybody. If you do need to park your car in your front garden, then have the sort of material there that will allow the rain to soak in through that, instead of causing it to run off into the sewage system. So that's one thing that people can think of doing. And then there are, as a way of creating new wetland areas and creating space for nature, there's great opportunity for people to get involved in caring for and helping to maintain these spaces, and take ownership of these spaces. As I say, it's that there's so much potential for more constructed wetlands in our cities, and these are slowly being delivered, and there's huge opportunity for local communities, for neighbourhoods to get involved in these projects and to help look after them and make sure that they're maintained, that they're sustained, they become these amazing havens for wildlife, where children can discover the natural world for educational purposes, and for, as Hugo mentioned, the health and well-being benefits of green spaces and how important that is. And we've come to realise that so much during the COVID pandemic, how important our blue-green space is. So that's yet another advantage of these nature-based solutions. And yet there is a huge role for the public there, volunteering, using these spaces, promoting and encouraging them, and getting behind these initiatives. So yeah, I mean, you can look on the websites of many of us, of Canals and Rivers Trust and the Service Against Sewage, and of course of Thames 21's website as well, and those of other rivers trusts, and find out how you can get involved. Now that we're all coming out of COVID, there are so many more opportunities to get involved in looking after your natural environment. Volunteering programs are expanding, opportunities are opening up. So look at websites, make inquiries of your local NGO, and find out how you can get involved and help with this initiative. And we can all help green up our cities, green up our coasts, and improve things.
Can I just add to that? I agree with all of that. Great points, Debbie. But I also think that the public coming together for things like the litter picks and beach cleans that Richard and Debbie have highlighted have a really big effect, not just because of the civic pride and connecting communities and sending a signal out to industry and politicians about the changes that the public want to see, but the data collected at these sorts of initiatives can really help influence much bigger change, legislative change, and also change within businesses. So we've seen the success of the 5p plastic bag charge. That came about because of volunteers collecting and finding plastic bags on beach. We've seen the commitment to the deposit return scheme, which we know, of course, will feature in the Environment Bill and is a big piece of new policy and legislation that will stop millions, if not billions, of plastic bottles from ending up in our waterways and in our ocean. And the same for the recent ban on cotton bud sticks and straws and steroids. All of that started with citizen science and people at the beach. And the UN is calling for citizen science to be a key part of this decade of change. And so people must feel inspired, not just by what they do locally, but how that connects nationally and internationally to create change.
Yeah, I completely agree, Hugo. I mean, the huge benefit of citizen science is its people power. It's we can achieve so much more using trained and supported volunteers to uncover this data, to survey the foreshore, to survey rivers, to survey our coasts, than academics couldn't even consider achieving with what they can afford for themselves. Our academics are very stretched. They simply can't carry out the massive surveys that need to be done in order to collect this data. But people can, ordinary citizens can, if they're trained and supported and have robust techniques to follow. So it is hugely important data. We found this with our Thames River Watch programme on the River Thames, and we were able to provide data on single-use plastic bottles that end up in the River Thames and single-use carrier bags, cotton bud sticks, as Hugo mentioned, and of course wet wipes, unfortunately, from the sewage system that overflows. So yeah, the role of citizen science is massively important, and it's gaining credibility, particularly where it's supported by academics who are involved in establishing the survey techniques and survey analysis. So it's science and people working together.
I'd like to just echo that. I mean, in my area, we've got a lot of chalk streams, which is one of the reasons that I'm very actively campaign on that. But each of them has a river restoration group or a group that is supporting them. And they, of course, have become an army through the chalk, the Chalk Aquifer Alliance and other similar groups. And that's the army that drove us to set up an all-party group. So they're all doing a lot of work of the sort Debbie described, monitoring the conditions on rivers such as the Bean and the Mimram. But at the same time, they're also pushing the politicians from the ground up to really get on and sort the rivers out and make them cleaner, pleasant places. And it's that combination, citizen power, really, which makes things happen.
And my just final quickly to add to what everyone has said, Andrew, is that the canal is on the doorstep of millions of people. So you may not even know that it's there. So there's lots you can do by acting local. I mean, I know it's the slightly sort of glib, think global, act local. You see David Attenborough on the telly. How can I help? Well, you can help by just doing that cleanup at your local canal or river, whatever you've got on your doorstep, you can make a contribution.
And I mean, if you're not actually in an area with a river, there are organizations like WWF, like the Wildlife Trusts, which have coordinated this action as well. So I think any citizen can take part and push for this change that's so much needed.
All great contributions. It was great to hear that discussion between all of you on this. I would like to follow up with Sir Oliver Heald on a question that's related to this, and that is something that Debbie mentioned, and I know Hugo and Richard will want to weigh on this as well. But to deal with the problems in the sewer system, such as fatbergs, for instance, should we be looking at banning products such as non-flushable wet wipes and other sanitary products that are causing these problems? Should the government be taking stronger action on the source of the problem that we're seeing?
I mean, I think there's a great need for campaigns on fats, oils and greases because one of the reasons you end up with a fatberg is not just the sort of products which you describe, which shouldn't be going into the system, but it's also the the binding agents of the fats, the oils and the greases, which bind them together. So I think there's certainly a very strong case, and I've been involved previously in campaigns with Anglian Water against putting fats, oils and greases into the system. And then you're absolutely right, people shouldn't be putting these other products down there. I mean, whether it's possible to tackle it through criminal law, I personally doubt. I think it's education, it's campaigning, you know, it's pressing for action. I mean, the water companies are very expert in tackling these fatbergs, and I mean, some of them are absolutely enormous. And I think you know that you know, it's worth paying tribute actually to the people who do go and bust up these fatbergs, because it's a, you know, it's a terrible job, but they are actually very expert at it. But no, I think it's public information, it's fats, oils and greases campaigns, and then you know, pressing people with the knowledge. A lot of people are just very ignorant about what they should or shouldn't put into the system, and I think much more needs to be done on that.
Yeah, it's the fatbergs. Yes, they're the fats, oil, and greases, but all that is bound together by the wet wipes. That's what holds it together and creates these huge things that. Yeah, I mean, the water companies do a fantastic and not very nice job at getting rid of these things. But it's, you know, it's all cost. It's all a lot of money that could be spent on, you know, on improving rivers. Let's just stop these wet wipes from going into the system in the first place. Stop the fats and the oils and the greases too. When it comes to wet wipes, bin it, don't flush it. Really, that's got to be the message. There are. If you look at a packet of wet wipes, there are so many different types of message on it, whether it's flushable or not. What is meant by flushable? That means you can get it around the U-bend. I mean, that's all it means. It doesn't mean you should be flushing it. It doesn't say what happens to it once it goes into the environment. So just don't flush it. Don't flush the wet wipes, and ideally don't buy them in the first place if you can find an alternative. And we see them on the Thames, on the River Thames. The huge piles of wet wipes that are built up there. Normally we have an army of volunteers surveying the wet wipe mounds and removing them. This year, of course, that hasn't happened so much because of COVID. So it really is dramatic to see those wet wipes building up into these huge mounds. It's really dispiriting to see it. It's depressing for everybody. We've got a wonderful river system, and we shouldn't be treating it like this. Wet wipes, you know, if you really must use them, just don't flush them down the loo. Really don't.
I mean, is it warning labelling, do you think? You know, much more aggressively.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because there are quite subtle differences in some of the messages. If you're a busy mother with 2 toddlers around your feet and you're in the supermarket, and it might say non-flushable, do not flush, or it might say flushable, or it might say fine to flush. There are just too many very close messages. A warning, don't flush any of them, really.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? Because, you know, I agree that this is sort of a huge issue, and it's a perennial story, the fatberg, wherever it may be in the country, the biggest ever, whatever it might be. But, you know, I've seen public information campaigns around fats, oils and greases and around wet wipes for all of the time I've been here and before running SAS. And I'm not actually sure that public information is enough. I'm not sure it worked on littering. I'm not sure that it's worked on these issues. And I think we need to trace the solutions further back upstream to stop these at source. I actually think the public would accept a ban on wet wipes and would adapt around it. Come through 14 months where people haven't been allowed to hug their parents, see their friends, have people in their houses, and the public have gone with it. I think they can live without wet wipes and they will adapt around it. A ban would work. And to Debbie's point, I think there's so much confusion about the labelling, more sort of, you know, stuff on the packaging, which will always have a very limited space on that packaging next to brand needs. I'm not sure will be effective. And we see this in this sort of littering space too. Effectively, our systems are the things that aren't fit for purpose. Our waste disposal, our recycling systems, our water systems, our sewage systems now aren't fit for purpose. They're overwhelmed by the level of products we have in society, the increasing diversity of single-use plastics. And we need to design these out of the system. We need to find alternatives. We need to ban the things that really are causing the biggest damage, because effectively the profit is being made by the companies making those products, and they can diversify around them. I'm sure the wet wipe companies are making other products too that they can fall back on. So I think the public can and will respond to radical action from the government and from industry. We've seen that in abundance, and we should use that lesson to really start to change the systems around us.
I think I just very briefly add, because I entirely agree with what's been said. It's about recognising that convenience isn't just at one point in the life cycle. If it's convenience at the user end, but it causes tremendous damage to our environment, then there's something about saying, well, that actually isn't in a holistic way a convenient solution. And education's got to be part of it. But I think, as Hugo said, we have got to be brave about some of the decisions we make by really pointing out to people, if you want to have lovely beaches, you want to have clean rivers, you want to have canals that are attractive places to come, then there's got to be some rethinking of other aspects of the way we live that will enable that to happen, because all the cleanups in the world are fighting a losing battle if we don't make some more profound changes.
If we can just to add, if we can ban the manufacture of diesel and petrol cars within a short time frame, then I think we can do it on wet wipes and other single-use plastics that have a questionable place in society and a fairly superfluous function.
We haven't had wet wipes around for that long. We haven't been used to using them for that long, so it shouldn't really take everyone very much to stop using wet wipes at all. It should be easily achieved. If you think 10, 20 years ago, who used a wet wipe?
Kind of following on from this point, it would be good to have maybe, Deborah, your view on the question of PPE, for instance, and the threat that poses to rivers and oceans and wildlife more broadly. Obviously, we know that PPE being used very widely throughout society now, as it wasn't necessarily a short time ago. But do we have proper measures in place to dispose of this equipment, and how much of a threat to biodiversity in the water systems is that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. We are, of course, with COVID, we're using a lot more face masks and other PPE, and we are finding it in increased quantities in our rivers. These are being discarded. The single-use PPE is being discarded in the streets, and anything that's discarded in the street will find its way into the local river, and that's where it will stick, or the local canal, and that's where things come to rest, and they gather and they accumulate. So we are seeing during COVID, our Thames River Watch volunteers have been surveying this and have seen the accumulations of PPE building up. The solution to that, again, it's public education. It's about encouraging people to dispose of these things carefully. Perhaps we need more waste bins, ways that people can dispose of things more carefully. And of course, always, single use is not good in PPE or anything else. So we should be encouraging safe reusable options that can be put in the washing machine rather than single-use PPE.
Just to build on that, if I may, we've seen, we see single-use PPE at every beach that we go to. Masks are everywhere. You can barely set foot outside without seeing them. I've filmed them in the seas around Cornwall, floating in patches and sort of clumps, and it's sad to see. I fear that the PPE sort of littering has been almost a smokescreen for some of the plastic industry. Actually, it's a very easy story that the press has latched onto to talk about public littering, but actually we need to stop so much single-use plastics being manufactured. We've talked about it with wet wipes, and sort of almost to bridge into the sort of greater need to rewild and restore our rivers and seas. How can we do this with just so many inputs? It's all very well if we replant salt marshes or seagrass and kelp and other great blue carbon habitats, but if we see all of these plastics coming in endlessly from our society, they'll have little chance of truly establishing themselves, because all of that pollution will just affect the resilience of these ecosystems we rebuild. So it's really important that we do track not just the rebuilding of our wild spaces, but also all of these inputs, new and sort of historic.
Thank you for that. I have a question from the Right Honourable Sir Robert Atkins, former Minister for the Environment, and this I think is for Richard. What assistance should the government be giving to the Canal and River Trust for derelict canals, and what real action should be taken by the government against water companies to deal with leakages?
I know Robert well. He's a great supporter of the canals through his role at the Inland Waterways Association. So thank you for the question, Robert. We've seen the amazing work that have restored canals, and actually that has huge economic and social as well as environmental benefit when that happens. Most of that is now delivered through the active work of local volunteers, whose one is full of admiration for them. Very often it needs that injection of some form of funding. We've often had National Lottery Heritage funding, but increasingly, of course, that is under a great pressure from other very good causes. So I think, yes, for us to sort of see the canal network continue to reach or to return to communities that can then benefit, some form of funding would be very welcome. I have to, of course, think about the funding that we need to sustain the waterway network that we also have today, which itself consumes considerable resources. And as I touched on briefly earlier, with the rising impact of the more extreme weather we're seeing through climate change, the scale of investment we need to make in making our waterway network more resilient is going to be very daunting in the years ahead. And things that were built in the late 18th century aren't always built with some of the modern weather conditions in mind, and making that waterway network resilient is a really important objective for me, and I think for anyone who cares about how our waterways support our society. In terms of the question about the water companies, I mean, that probably isn't something that I can offer a very considered view about. If I'm honest, I will welcome the comments from others on the call, Andrew.
Sure.
Can I just jump in there just on the sort of the sort of historic sort of infrastructure that Richard sort of mentions there, because a lot of the sewer network that we're talking about today is still the Victorian sewer network that was built after the great stink of London in 1854, I think, and of course that actually the actual physical manifestation of that stink forced politicians to pass new legislation to get Bazalgette to build that system. And then we saw the next big piece of legislation in of course, the early 90s with the Water Framework Directive and the Urban Wastewater Directive, really forcing water companies to change and forcing them to have that investment. Now, don't we need this sort of radical big legislation that forces the investment again? And it was always those political decisions that then pushed industry to change and work on a level playing field and invest across their system to create a more sustainable future. So it's always an incremental and ongoing journey, but it feels like we're at that time again with the environment bill and this huge opportunity.
Sir Oliver, would you like to weigh in on this?
Yes, I mean, I think it is important to have adequate public funding, but at the same time, you look at a scheme like the tidal tunnel in London, which has been mentioned. I mean, that's an enormous undertaking, costing billions, and it shows that investment is going in. I mean, I actually think on something like the leakages issue, which was mentioned, that there is a balance to be struck between tackling the leakages, which is important, but also recognizing that there are areas of the country that are very badly water stressed, and that some of the schemes like the interconnector bringing water from the north into East Anglia, the projects for new reservoirs and so on, I mean, I think they're needed too, and they all involve a great deal of investment. So yes, you're right that we do need to invest. Obviously, a considerable amount is going in. But we shouldn't forget with canals that the history of recent years is of volunteers with not very much money actually doing a huge amount. And you know, I think in a way we wouldn't want to lose that, because those volunteers are investing in it in a way personally, which is important to the overall campaign for the environment and for improving our canals and other features in the country. So, you know, there's a balance to be struck with these things. Yes, enough funding, but also let's not shortchange the volunteers who are actually doing something fantastic.
And if I just very quickly respond to Oliver, I couldn't agree more that the way it unlocks all that community activity, the social action, is fantastic. It does often need for the really big things. If you've got a major road bridge in the way or some other major piece of infrastructure, you need that extra bit of funding. It's, as you said, it's the balance, it's the two together, and actually can often be the solution to some of the water issues as well. I mean, there are opportunities to complete the restoration of the Cotswolds canals that would reconnect the Severn to the Thames. That could then potentially be a source for transferring water from the west into the southeast. So very often, creatively, there are opportunities to restore, to create public benefit in terms of all the health and well-being, and also deliver a water transfer solution that can be part of that benefit as well.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Jazz Austin here that I think is interesting, and I might put to Sir Oliver. What do you think we need to see in the upcoming planning bill to ensure that sustainable drainage systems are incorporated into existing infrastructure and also new builds?
Well, the first thing to say is that, of course, it's not just the bill itself, but the regulations that go with it. And that's always been, you know, the way in which we structure these bills. And it's true of the other landmark bills that we've been talking about. But yes, I do think it's important that water is protected and kept clean in the building process. And, you know, one of the things that we've had as an issue, which I think Debbie mentioned, is runoff into our rivers full of chemicals. And one of the ways that we avoid that happening is to have proper building regulation. And, you know, in recent years, that has gradually improved, so that if you have a site which is going to have runoff, then it's an attempt to capture it and ensure that it's kept safe. But historically, there are still plenty of places where the runoff is dirty and it isn't being adequately captured. So yes, for the future, we do need to do that to protect the waterways. I think it's probably true that we need to go further, actually, if you look at some of the practices in agriculture and so on.
I do think there is a very strong argument for SUDS to be incorporated into development and building works as standard. I believe it works very well in Scotland. But for some reason we haven't adopted it in the rest of the UK. It's well worth looking at, and I think it's important if it can be done.
Yeah.
Great. So we have a question here from Leighton Hughes, and he mentions, and this is kind of building on the sustainable drainage system question somewhat, yeah. So Dasgupta is a great policy framework for addressing the threats to clean water. But what new technologies are you most excited about? I might come back to Debbie, and then we'll open it up to others if that's okay.
Yeah, new technologies. It's not new, really. We've talked a lot about nature-based solutions, and this is at the vanguard of new technology, if you like. It's some of the oldest technology as well, but we're just using it a lot better. And there's greater awareness of the importance of nature-based solutions, of creating constructed wetlands, of swales and reed beds, and so on, and how we can use these natural, how we can use our natural environment to manage our water much better. And we are the evidence for these is increasing, and the fine-tuning of the methodologies we use is improving all the time. And this is clearly the future. And it in some ways it sounds like at first glance you might think nature-based solutions, that sounds very pretty and nice and everything, but it is actually a very cost-effective, sustainable, and an important technology that we need to embrace if we're going to solve some of these issues much more widely.
Can I sort of add to that, because I agree with that. And when we talk about nature-based solutions, sort of synonymous with the rewilding agenda, which is so important and so topical, and there's so much good work being done on terrestrial and on marine and aquatic habitats, and we're seeing projects like the reintroduction of beavers to slow the flow down of rivers, to put the natural sort of ecosystem back in order. And I think this is going to be more and more prevalent, and we need to invest in the projects that will allow nature to really function as it should do, and water to travel at the speed or to slow the speed down of water, because a lot of our flooding issues are to do with rivers being straightened, floodplains being built on, salt marshes being taken away, sea defences being built. So we really need to restore the balance with nature, because nature does a great job in protecting us. Of course, we are part of nature, and all of these projects are going to be vital in this solution, because they will be ultimately the most cost-effective way of doing things in the future.
And if I could just throw a couple of things in, Andrew, I mean, I think that the nature-based solutions, absolutely, we're doing a lot more work on bank protection using natural solutions rather than spending on sort of heavier, more intrusive engineering, and that's clearly very much more sympathetic to the environment that we're in. The one thing I think is perhaps a slight tangent to the rest of the discussion that's a big opportunity is to use water for some of our energy. The opportunity for water-sourced heat pumps in many of our residential and commercial areas where there is a local water space, a local canal, a local river. There's a very big opportunity to take some of our energy consumption levels down just using a relatively simple technology. It hasn't been rolled out at scale, but we're very excited about the prospect of using the local water body with a water-sourced heat pump to provide a proportion of a building's energy needs for heating and for cooling. Because of that latent temperature differential between the air and the water, there's always some benefits in using the greater differential that the water offers over the air in supporting those energy solutions in our buildings for the future.
Yes, I mean, if I could just offer a couple of comments on this. I mean, in our area of Hertfordshire, we have a lot of chalk streams which are dry in the summer months and often longer periods than that. And one of the problems is water abstraction, and that also affects the cleanliness of the water, because if there isn't very much water in the stream and there is pollution coming in, then you can end up with upper reaches of chalk streams which should be absolutely pure as anything, not being. And so I think there are a range of measures you can take to improve that. For example, taking the water that you need to abstract from lower down the stream so that the upper reaches remain with a reasonable level of flow. Recycling water so that grey water from which has been treated, that is brought back into the river. But of course, you need to be very careful that that water is clean enough. And one of the things that scientists are looking at the moment for industry is whether they can recycle water to a very high standard of cleanliness. And it might be something that also has an implication for chalk streams and rivers. And then on the point about wetlands, again, it's about sufficiency of water to some extent. In an area which is water stressed, like most of the southeast and certainly East Anglia, we do need to bring water into the area in order to enable the wetlands to have the very beneficial effects that Debbie was mentioning. And also so that we can do some of the things with peat that we need to do, because upland peat, there's every hope there'll be a ban on burning it, and there'll be restrictions on selling it. But in the lowland peat areas, which again are a fantastic carbon sink, having enough water to keep them wet is a very important thing, because wet peat soaks up carbon and dry peat emits it. So, there is a big issue, I think, about bringing the water resources into the stressed areas and then ensuring that we don't damage the chalk streams upland, the upper reaches of them, by taking too much water from there.
Yeah, I think that we do need to think a lot more about recycling our water. It's something that culturally we're not used to doing in this country. In other countries, it works very well. maybe that's something we need to start to work towards and all get used to thinking about, recycling our water much more. I think we've been spoilt in the past in this country, thinking that water is plentiful, it's everywhere, and we're going to use it any way we want. Well, it is. It's a scarce and precious commodity, and we all need to change the way that we view water a little bit.
Yes, actually, Debbie, on this question, we have one from the audience that's related to this, and it's the user is the username is Wakas. I hope I've pronounced that correctly, but asks, can we look at resource recovery to give those that discharge a reason to sell the wastewater if treated as fuel and fertilizer as opposed to being treated? Does that make is that clear?
I don't really know much about this, but it sounds a really interesting concept. And it's all about the more that we can make things economically successful, economically viable, the easier it will be to take forward things that improve the natural environment. So yeah, I think it sounds, I don't know much about it myself, but it sounds like a really interesting concept that we should explore. The more we can recycle, the better. So yeah.
Excellent. So this has been an incredibly fascinating discussion, and you all were a great panel, building off each other's points and clarifying, contrasting. I'd like to do at the very end here, given that our focus, the focus of Bright Blue and John Ellerman's series is looking ahead to COP. I'd just like to do a sort of lightning round and ask in turn each of you to give one example of the water policy that you think the UK should adopt to make itself a leading model at the upcoming COP26 and COP15 this year. And if I may, I'll start with Sir Oliver and then move on from there.
I think it is to do with the seas. I mean, I would, although I have a great love of the rivers and campaign on that a lot, but I do think this idea of having more of the oceans protected and a higher protection marine area policy, so that some of the, as Richard Benyon suggested, some of the areas are not just protected through protection areas, but also through higher protection areas, that would be the big ask. And so it's the work really of the Global Ocean Alliance and trying to get more of the sea protected, and that would tackle so many issues, including the plastics challenge.
Debbie, would you like to go next?
What we need clean rivers, absolutely essential for our lives. We need this water. We can't exist without our rivers, and they need to be a priority. And so what we need to do is improve on the Water Framework Directive targets. We need to revisit that. They need to be more stringent, and they need to be invested in meeting these. We need to bring together budgets. We need to be much better and smarter at locating the projects that can work together to improve our rivers. But we certainly can't let the push that was created by the Water Framework Directive slide down the priority. We need to be reinforcing this, and we need to be putting in place really stringent targets for us all to work towards meeting.
Excellent. Richard, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think I'd entirely echo what Debbie said. I think I'm very conscious that globally, which of course is where COP26 would be thinking, we are not a nation that has the same issues around water that many of our other sort of nations in the world do have. So we should of course acknowledge that their issues around water are going to be considerably more in play, I guess, in terms of the big global dimension of COP26. But thinking very domestically about what we need to deal with pollution at source. We need to have, as Debbie says, stricter, clearer, better, tighter accountability for who is putting the pollution, whether that's sewage, whether that's plastic, whether that's the other waste, whether that's actually having some real teeth to tackle fly tipping, anything that's actually polluting, so that when it gets into the proper water system, down into the river and out to the sea, it's really too late. So some more clarity, some more conviction, some real more teeth around dealing with the pollution issue at source is, I think, the thing that domestically we would need.
Hugo.
Yeah, look, I think Debbie and Richard have focused on those inputs, which I agree with 100%. But I will align myself with Sir Oliver's comments, because I agree. I think we really need to use COP15 and COP26 to push forward this 30 by 30 agenda and focus on highly protected marine areas or fully protected marine areas. There's a pathway set out by the Benyon report, a fantastic report that I think really shows the benefits of doing that, not just to the environment, biodiversity and climate resilience, but also to the fisher community, which is so important. So economically good, but also environmentally good. And that's the balance we're looking to strike. So I would urge, as we are with our petition at Surface Against Sewage, that COP26 puts the ocean front and center, and the restoration of wild ocean habitats front and center as a real priority, because this is the environment that we stand the most chances of succeeding in restoring if we give nature the chance to recover.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank you all, the speakers, for having joined us today. And I'd like to thank the audience as well for your participation. We, Bright Blue, are planning further events as part of our Looking Ahead to COP series, including one on the greening of overseas development aid and export finance, as well as many others. You can find out more information about the events that we are planning by following our Twitter page. And you can see the previous events, including this one, on our YouTube page anytime. So from me, Andrew, I'd just like to thank you all and wish you a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.